there, welcome back. I'm Pam. My son Sam is behind the camera again, and we're in my kitchen today, and I would like to share with you my chocolate cake recipe. This recipe is what everybody requests when they're having a birthday in our house. I make it for friends on their birthdays. I bring it to functions when I need to bring dessert, and everybody loves it. It is ridiculously simple, easy, and the best tasting chocolate cake I think there is. I've tried a lot of different recipes over the years, and I always come back to this. This recipe, it's my recipe. I'm calling it my recipe now. It originated as a Betty Crocker recipe 40 years ago, and I've changed so much of it that it does not resemble that anymore. So I'd like to show you how to make it. Actually, you don't even need to know how to make it, really. I just want to share the recipe with you and show you how easy it is to make. If you're in the habit of using a chocolate cake mix, I promise you that this is just as easy. You just have a few more ingredients to throw in the bowl. That's it. There's no sifting flour, creaming butter and sugar, separating eggs, none of that. This is the easiest, most delicious recipe, and I know you're gonna love it. So if you take a look, I have measured out my ingredients ahead of time on the counter. I highly recommend that you do that. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm in the middle of a recipe and I've pulled out all my ingredients, but I haven't measured them out, and then somebody calls me on the phone or somebody in the house says something to me, and I think, did I throw the salt in? I don't know. The salt shaker's sitting there, but I don't know if I put it in. And so of course I could taste it, but maybe not everything can you tell. You know, salt might be obvious, but so if you measure it out, it goes so much quicker, and you know what you've put in and what you haven't. So let's get started. First thing I want to show you is that I like to use 2 round cake pans for this recipe. It just is a showier cake than putting it in a 13 by 9. I never use a 13 by 9 for cakes, but if you like to do that, you can do that with this recipe. So I cut out 2 rounds of parchment paper, and I sprayed the bottom, and then I put the parchment down, then I sprayed it again, and they're all ready to go. Now that might seem very basic for some of you, but I found out last week, a friend of mine told me that she's using these tutorials while they are sheltering at home and are doing school at home for her daughters, and she's using this as life skills, math, home economics, and so because some of my audience is younger, I might be a little more elementary in some of the things I'm explaining, and if you think, well, she didn't need to tell me that, you'll just know why I did. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to add the flour. And you know, I think I'm going to take this off of here. So everything goes in a bowl. Can you believe this? I mean, you just dump it in the bowl. You don't mix anything separately. That's cocoa powder. I'm going to talk to you about cocoa powder in just a few minutes, because there is a difference between cocoa powders. So there's oil, and there's eggs, and there's some full fat sour cream. I always use full fat. You may choose to use low fat. That would be your choice. I don't know how the recipe would come out, to be honest with you, because I always use full fat. I have substituted full fat plain yogurt for the sour cream when I had yogurt in my refrigerator and not sour cream, and I wanted to make the cake. It turned out fine. Some water. Whoops, I just went over there. Salt. Baking soda. Baking powder, butter, and it's unsalted. This recipe originally called for vegetable shortening. I don't use vegetable shortening because it's really not good for you, so I always use butter. Vegetable shortening, if you're going to substitute in a recipe butter for vegetable shortening, be sure you use unsalted, because there's no salt in vegetable shortening, so you're going to change the flavor of your cake if you do that. vanilla. Look how easy this is, all in one bowl. Isn't that what you do with a cake mix? Only, you know, eggs and oil in the mix. But now, this is something else I like to do with cake mixes. This is instant espresso coffee. And I like to put a heaping teaspoon in there. Coffee just, in chocolate recipes, intensifies and deepens the flavor and just makes it more complex. And I love doing that. I do it in the cake mix and I do it in the frosting. And I'm going to share my frosting recipe with you as well. Now, we are going to mix this up. And when you start it out, because everything is just there and you haven't creamed anything and you're not slowly adding your flour, start it slow. Even on the lowest speed, sometimes it kicks out a little bit. Really low. Let it get spinning. We're gonna mix it up just enough so we can scrape the bowl. Now I can increase the speed a little bit. I'm gonna scrape the bowl. Be sure your butter is soft, by the way, when you're using it. And when you're scraping the bowl, get way down at the bottom because your dry ingredients will hide down there. And then when you go to pour this into your cake pan, you'll go, oh my goodness, there's flour at the bottom. And you know, that's not thoroughly mixed. So there, I've scraped the bowl. I'm gonna scrape it one more time before we're done, but I'm gonna let this beat on high for 3 minutes. And of course, we will turn off the camera while we do that. But it's just gonna get it going, get it up to high speed. I will scrape the bowl one more time before we reach the 3-minute mark. And we'll come back in a few minutes. All right, this is mixed up well for about 3 minutes. I've scraped the bowl a couple times. If you don't have a paddle attachment, you can use your whisk. You can even use, do it by hand, but I've always used an electric mixer of some sort to do this cake because it calls for whipping it on high speed. And you want to make sure that you get your butter incorporated in there well. I also wanted to mention, if you're not in the habit of baking a whole lot, make sure that your baking soda and your baking powder are fresh. Check the date, because the quickest way to ruin a cake recipe is to not have fresh leavening agents. So what we're going to do is put this in our pan, scrape the bowl again, going to evenly divide it. I can see little bits of butter in there. It's a little cooler today, so my butter may not have softened up as much as it should have, which hopefully won't affect things too much. Try to divide these up evenly so your layers are even, but if they're not, it's not a big deal. This is not supposed to be stressful. This is just easy. Okay, so we got it all. There we go. You're going to get some little bubbles on top. And the best thing to do when you have those bubbles is to take your pan and do this. And it will burst some of the bubbles. They're not going to make big bubbles when it's baking anyway. But so we're going to put it in the oven for 30 minutes until a pick comes out clean. Try not to overbake it. You don't want a dry cake. I wanted to talk to you about cocoa powders. When you have a recipe that calls for cocoa powder, pay attention to what you're buying and what the recipe is asking for. Cocoa powder is made from cacao beans that are fermented, dried, roasted, crushed, then they remove a lot of the butter fat from them and they make cocoa powder. But there are two kinds, natural and Dutch process. You can use natural cocoa powder in any recipe. Dutch process, you have to be careful, so follow the recipe. If you were to use this in a recipe that called for leavening agents like baking soda or baking powder, this would not work well, and I'll tell you why. Baking powder is an acid naturally, but when Dutch process goes through that process, they take it through an alkaline solution and it changes its pH to neutral. So there's no acid in here to activate your leavening agents. So simply follow recipes carefully, and if it doesn't specify, use natural cocoa powder, which will have the acid in it you will need to activate those agents. Now, having said that, in my cake recipe, it originally called for unsweetened chocolate that you melt. And I found I don't like to do that because I think it tastes better with cocoa powder and some oil. There is a conversion if you're going to change that over from a chocolate in a recipe, a melted chocolate, to cocoa powder. You have to add some oil, but you can Google that. But I like this cocoa powder. It's a natural and Dutch cocoa powder, and I think the mixture works really well in that cake, and this is what I always use. So anyway, a little bit of a science lesson there if you didn't know, and if you did and you didn't need to hear it, I'm sorry, but it is important when you're baking. And also wanted to say that Dutch processed cocoa powder, that's what they make Oreo cookies with, and that's why they're so dark, because Dutch process is a darker, more mellow flavor. This is another one, Dutch process. It's a lot more expensive than this one, twice as much, but it's nice. Anyway, just a little bit of information I want to share with you. So pay attention with your recipes, what they're asking for. Okay, so we're going to wait for that cake to come out and cool, and then we'll get to frosting it, and I'll show you how easy that is as well. So our cake's baked for about 30 minutes. This one actually came out before this one did. So, check them both with a toothpick and make sure you get a clean pick. And I usually will do that 2 or 3 times before I get it right to where I want to take it out. So these have been taken out. They have cooled for 10 minutes in the pan. And now I am going to remove them. And I want to just show you how I do that. Go around the sides of the pan. Be real careful not to dig up your cake when you do this though. And then you just turn it over. I set it on here, just let go. Sometimes the paper will be there on the cake, and other times it will be in the pan. It doesn't really matter. So it's pretty hot, but you're not handling it for very long. Turn it over, set it down, and let it go. So now we have 2 very hot cakes. We are going to let those cool completely. It's probably going to take an hour, maybe 2, depending on the temperature of the day. You don't want to frost a cake that is even the slightest warm. You'll just be so sorry. So we're going to let this cool completely and come back later today, and I will share how to do my frosting, which is absolutely as easy as the cake, and it's delicious, and I want to show you how to put that together and how to actually frost the cake if you've never done that before. Okay, see you in a bit. Okay, we are back. Our cakes have cooled completely and we are ready to frost them. As you can see, they've got crumbs around the side, so it's always a good idea to carefully pick up your cake without cracking it in half, taking it over to the sink and just brushing the crumbs off that fall easily. And then because this is cool, we're going to set it on our cake plate. So we're going to get ready to frost it. Try to center it on there. Well, that's okay. Now, pick this other one up and really be careful not to crack your cake when you're picking it up. Again, we're going to brush the cake off. And then we're going to put it back down because we need to frost this one first. So, the frosting is as simple as the cake mix. I've got my butter, this time salted. Salted butter is really good in frosting. And then we're simply going to add a box of powdered sugar. Some cocoa powder, and this time we can use Dutch process or the natural, it doesn't matter. But since we have no leavening going on in the frosting, it doesn't matter which one. I use about 1/3 of a cup. And this measurement does not have to be super precise. Frosting is a little more forgiving than an actual cake mix when it comes to amounts, I find. So I throw my frosting in there, or my cocoa powder. I'm going to put some vanilla, about a teaspoon or a little more. So I've got the butter, a box of powdered sugar, some cocoa powder, and then what I have done, that dried cocoa espresso powder, espresso coffee powder that I showed you that I put in the cake, I have made just some instant coffee with it, very strong, a whole heaping teaspoon, and this is what I'm going to use for my wet ingredients. If you don't want that hint of espresso in your frosting, you can use milk or half and half. And I wanted to tell you, you're not going to taste the coffee in the cake. It's very subtle, and you won't detect the coffee. It'll just make the chocolate taste. I can't even think of the word, but anyway, it just adds to the flavor of the chocolate cake. Now, I didn't measure this, so I'm just going to add a little bit right now, part of it. And I'm going to get my mixer going. And I'm going to judge how much I need to add as we go along. So that's pretty dry and lumpy. So I'm going to add a little more. Just a little bit, because boy, you can sure water down frosting very quickly if you're not careful. So now it's starting to come together. Still a little bit dry. So I'm going to put maybe another teaspoon and put up the speed, and I'm going to mix this until it's really smooth, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I mixed up my frosting. It was as simple as that, all in one bowl. I did not need to add any more of the espresso coffee to it, and enhancing the flavor was what I was trying to think of when you add coffee to chocolate recipes. So, but you will detect some coffee flavor in the frosting, but not in the cake. Okay, so we are going to frost it now. I stick a blob of it right there, and it really helps to use an offset spatula when you're frosting a cake. You just spread it around. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy because this is just in the middle. Okay, so we've got a layer of frosting right there. Now I'm going to add the other layer that we brushed off, and it's a good idea to turn your layer over, leave it this way, the flat side up. It gives you a nice flat top to your cake. And then you're going to frost the sides first. So we just come over here and we add frosting to the sides and smooth it around. Trying our very best not to get it on the plate or the doily or whatever you might have under it. If you do, it's not a big deal, but it just looks better if it's clean, you know. You know, I was talking about earlier this being my favorite chocolate cake, and I have a group of friends. We hang out on a regular basis, and they like this chocolate cake too. And one of my friends was having a birthday in February, and I thought, okay, what am I gonna make? She likes chocolate cake, she likes my chocolate cake, but for some reason, I just didn't stick with my recipe. And I saw something online that looked interesting. It had a raspberry filling, and it had a ganache top, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna make that for her birthday. And I gotta tell you, I was disappointed, and I know that the people that ate it knew it was not my chocolate cake recipe. I mean, it was good, but it just wasn't this cake. So what I have learned from that is if you find a recipe you really like, it's easy enough to adapt it to a new recipe. I could have put the raspberry filling in here and the ganache over the top and stuck with a cake that I know I like. So, you know, live and learn. And everybody was really polite and they ate it, but it didn't get the oohs and ahs that this cake gets. So there, I've done the side. I missed a little spot there. I'm not going to worry too much about that right now just because of time's sake. But if I were not doing this video, I would certainly try to cover that up. And then we're just going to put the rest on top. Something else I want to tell you about this cake. If you can stand to wait, it's actually really delicious the next day and the day after. It keeps a long time. I mean, not weeks, but 3 or 4 days if it lasts that long in your house. And it just gets more flavorful. So, you know, if you're gonna need this cake for a recipe, I'd suggest you make it the day before and then just cover it with plastic wrap. You don't need to refrigerate it. There's plenty of sugar in this cake to preserve it. And, you know, every once in a while when you're baking a cake, your layers won't come out even and your cake might be a little bit lopsided. If it's just for your family, that's not a big deal, but when you're bringing it somewhere, that's kind of disappointing. Sometimes you can build up those layers with an extra glob of frosting, you know, somewhere to compensate for the unevenness. But anyway, don't worry. If you've not made a homemade cake before, don't worry about all those little details. Just make the recipe. Now you can do whatever you want on the top. I like to take my offset spatula and do this. And I just like the design it leaves. You don't have to, you can just smooth it, you know? Now if you want to add sprinkles and candles for a birthday party, your cake is all set, and I promise you that everybody's gonna love it. I'd like to cut into it and show you what it looks like inside, because you're probably curious. Cut a piece. First piece is always hard to get out, and sometimes you have to cut that first piece to get other pieces to be so nice. Tomorrow, this cake will just kind of settle a little bit, and it will be a little more dense, which I actually like better. But this tastes fabulous today. Fudgy and moist and chocolatey. Let me know if you try this cake recipe and how you like it. And if you're enjoying my videos, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit a thumbs up, leave a comment, hit the subscribe button. And if you hit the little bell, it will notify you every single time that I put up a new video, and you won't have to go hunting for it. So thank you for watching today, and happy baking. Bye-bye.